All right, in the last 15 years, you've written two incredible, amazing books, both of which have been wildly popular, and yet I think they're more popular today than they were when they were on the bestseller list. So can you talk to us a little bit about the framework and about what you think, why they're popular, and the impact of those books?
Well, I can talk from my own experience. You know, Leadership in the Line was written in 2002. We actually finished the book. The last day that Heifetz and I worked together on the book was September 11th, 2001.
Oh my.
Very strange experience. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if we have time for this, but I'll tell you a little anecdote. The cover, the title of the book was going to be something about survival. And the cover picture on the book was a man floating in air.
Oh goodness.
And so on the afternoon of September 11th, the publisher walked into our editor's office and said, you have to change the cover of the book and the title of the book in 24 hours. And so we ended up with Leadership on the Line, which has worked fine, but that is the story.
What a story.
So my experience is that between 2002 when the book came out and 2007 and 8 when the recession came, it was a kind of a hard sell.
Yeah.
That is, it made sense to people, but it didn't grab people. You know, life was good, things were going well. You know, the way we were engaging with people is, you know, you're good, you want to be great. You know. After the recession, when I think the combination, in my view, the combination of 9/11, non-state supported terrorism and war, and the recession created a different kind of anxiety. And it doesn't matter whether you're 1% or the 99%. People experience it. They experience it in different ways, but they experienced it. And so what we found is that after, in 2009, 2010, these ideas made sense to people because it's about adaptation. It's about how difficult adaptation was, and all of a sudden adapting to a new reality, living in times of uncertainty and ambiguity, was everybody's lived experience.
That's right.
And so, no, people weren't fighting with the ideas anymore; they were embracing them. So I think we were very lucky, for some not so pleasant reasons, in that the things that we were thinking about and trying to talk about in the first 5 or 6 years of the new century suddenly became relevant and on everybody's lips as they dealt with the realities of a very rapidly changing world.
And in education, no more so than in education, our field. So it has become widespread knowledge, adaptive leadership now in education, whereas I would say just 2 to 3 years ago, nobody even knew what we were talking about when we talked about adaptive leadership. So can you talk a little bit about the applications or the implications for education?
Well, I think education is dealing with the same thing that the entertainment industry is dealing with, that the lawyer industry is dealing with, the healthcare industry, which is we're living globally in a period that's characterized by constant change and great uncertainty about the future. And that's as true for education as it is for any other field. Well, when you're living in times of uncertainty, rapid change, ambiguity, then what are the skills that are needed? There are different kind of skills. And the skills that are needed is the capacity to adapt, to change yourself in order to be successful and cope and survive and thrive in a different set of circumstances. And that requires some observational skills. You've got to see that it's happening. You can't be in denial about it. So you've got to be good at seeing. You've got to be good at diagnosing what's going on. And most importantly, you've got to be willing to leave behind beliefs, values, behaviors that have served you well in the past, but are now holding you back and going forward. So I think in education, that's very true. As you know, I'm chair of a charter school management board, and so I see, from that vantage point, I see a lot that's happening in K-12 education, the tension between what's going on in the charter school world and what's going on in the public school world, this stuff this week about what's happening with the for-profit schools and the pushback from the federal government. If you're sitting in a senior authority position in the education world today, the sands are shifting all the time.
For everyone.
underneath you.
Yeah.
And how to live and survive and be successful under those circumstances is very different. I grew up in the 50s.
Yeah.
You know, it was steady state, right?
That's right.
And everything was incremental. There were no big changes. There were no big threats, you know. You had a pretty good idea what was going to happen next. And I think all of that between 9/11 and the recession got thrown out the window.
Absolutely. And in education, it's so interesting because I don't think ever before until right now, 2016, have leaders thought there actually was a framework and a skill set that you needed to have. It was, if you were a good manager and you knew how to do things, you could run a school or run a large organization or have a multi-million-dollar, and it wasn't a skill set. So that's so phenomenal to me that people never thought deeply.
Well, I mean, you know better than I do how teachers have been trained, you know. I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I was in high school, the girls who were not smart enough to go to good colleges went to teachers' colleges, right? And in times of kind of steady state times, that was probably okay.
That's right.
You know, it's not enough
right.
now. From this vantage point in the charter school world, it's overwhelming that the most important challenge we face is talent.
Absolutely.
Is getting really, really good people into the classroom. And running a school is an exhausting, demanding job under the circumstances which we're facing.
Absolutely.
Very different.
Well, schools have not been about learning, traditionally have not been about learning. It was not, teachers were not held accountable for student learning, and they really were for students who already could learn on their own, who really didn't need school. It wasn't until we had this influx of students who were school dependent, right? Without the school, they are second language, children of poverty, they need schools, that we all of a sudden looked at teacher quality and said, oh my gosh, we have a whole lot of people that have no idea how to actually teach and have people learn.
Right, right.
So.
I think, and there's so much, again, you know this so much better than I do, but it's like the medical business was 20 years ago, where good teachers have trouble keeping up with all the innovations and the change and the new thinking that's going on. And you know, I've talked to my daughter-in-law as a teacher in the public schools in Brooklyn, in New York, and she's just exhausted.
Yeah.
You know, she's exhausted.
Yeah.
And it's not because she's got discipline problems. It's just because the demands of dealing with kids who are growing up in this current world. And she's dealing with middle school kids. It's their own. They've always been challenging.
Exactly.
It's just physically and emotionally draining. You know, more than intellectually draining.
Absolutely. And your framework would be helpful even for teachers. Your framework is extremely helpful for teachers if they understand what you're trying to get across in the adaptive leadership framework.
Yeah, and it's hard for people who have been trained a certain way to give up some of the things that they're good at and that have worked for them.
Absolutely.
You know? And so
it's hard for all of us.
Right, it is. But and we're talking particularly about educators, and I think it's very hard for anybody, but particularly for educators. You know, you're alone in the classroom. It's your classroom, and all of a sudden things aren't working the way they said they were going to work.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah. In any people profession, it's that way though, because people are unpredictable, right? Humans are unpredictable, and we can't ever know what they're going to do and how they're going to act, and we get in a whole new crop every year.
Well, and particularly, I think, again, when you think about the world in which today's young people were brought up in, it's a world in which they are used to rapid change. They're used to a different kind of learning. I remember, this is not that old, but my youngest, I remember once when he was in high school, and I'm kind of a sports fan junkie, you know, and my kids and I talk about sports all the time. And I remember one day when I was talking to him, and I realized that from watching ESPN, he knew more about what was going on, and he also had a big picture sense that from my reading the newspaper I didn't have.
You weren't getting,
you know,
really interesting.
And it was very interesting. So these kids are they're learning about life in ways that were different than certainly when I was growing up.
Yeah, and they have access to expert information, right?
And that's going to have consequences in the classroom.
That's right, absolutely.